My name is David Daniel Ball, and these are the headlines for Wednesday, the 4th of February, 2009. Opposition may block $42 billion stimulus plan. Costello slams Rudd's miserable essay. Mum had 80 raped for a bomb mission. Banned MySpace sex offenders finding haven on Facebook, claims security expert. Gatto hits out at underbelly portrayal. Explosion hits Hell's Angels clubhouse. Guns, drugs seized in police raid. ATM bombers flee with cash. Slap on the wrist after brothel hires 14-year-old. Stolen war medals traded for drugs. And in comments, did sniffer dogs kill this Perth teenager? With a teenager dead in Perth as a direct result of sniffer dog searches, we really need to be asking, are they worth it? Tim Blair weighs up the pros and cons. This piece has been included as comedy. Sometimes I include pieces that are serious. Tim Blair could not possibly be serious with this. From Piers Akerman, Rudd is plunging us deep into the red. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's latest multi-billion-dollar attempt to stimulate the Australian economy would have achieved a degree of credibility if he had not blatantly politicised the issues in his parliamentary address. Rudd is, as ever, an opportunist first and foremost. When it suited him, he and Treasurer Wayne Swan talked the economy down. When they finally awoke to the crisis others had already foreseen, they attempted to change their tune in mid-song. Too often this team has been caught flat-footed. Too often it has thrown money at the problem without having any notion whether their solution has any chance of succeeding. The Rudd-Swan Christmas splash did nothing to stop the spiral. A responsible leadership team would seek a bipartisan approach to the crisis. Rudd has destroyed any possibility of building that consensus. I heard someone ask how their $950 would be spent. I'm unemployed for 20 months and got nothing from the last package either. I have been illegally blacklisted with the aid of a few ALP state ministers so that I now have no choice but have myself declared unfit for work. My state-managed super has gone down 35% or $65,000 since October. That is Rudd. Workers Against Mormonism by Tim Blair. Union leader Bill Ludwig insists he isn't a climate change skeptic, a claim some may doubt. Ride out the recession, farms for rent, just $1 per week. Trains and planes. New South Wales railway cleaner Kevin Larkin was fired after turning up to work drunk. Hey, it's not as though he had to fly a jet or anything. Dems withdrawn. Paying more taxes is the patriotic thing to do if you're a wealthy American, according to Vice President Joe Biden. But finding a patriotic Democrat isn't easy. Finally, Democrats have found a tax cut they can support. One that puts even more money in the pockets of Barbara Streisand, Michael Moore, and the rest of their pals in Tinseltown. Abdul away. Australian terrorist leader Abdul Nachur Benbrika has been jailed for a minimum of 12 years. His co-accused received lesser sentences. From Andrew Bolt, change means tax dodgers and lobbyists. Even the New York Times is noticing that perhaps Barack Obama isn't the Messiah, even if he's not yet just a naughty boy. During almost 2 years on the campaign trail, Barack Obama vowed to slay the demons of Washington bar lobbyists from his administration, usher in what he would later call, in his inaugural address, a new era of responsibility. What he did not talk much about were the asterisks, the exceptions that went unmentioned, now include a pair of cabinet nominees who did not pay all of their taxes. Then there's the lobbyist for a military contractor who is now slated to become the number 2 official in the Pentagon. And there are others brought into government from the influence industry, even if not formally registered as lobbyists. Several Democrats, including some who have advised Mr. Obama, said privately that he had only himself to blame for delivering such an uncompromising message as a candidate without recognizing how it would complicate his ability to assemble an administration. Cute that it's just his naivety that's blamed. Were Clinton, Blair, Hawke, and Keating neoliberals? Jared Henderson says the problem with Kevin Rudd's claim that 30 years of neoliberalism caused this economic slump is that it's completely against the facts. The essential problem with Rudd's essay is that it is ahistorical. The fact is, what he terms neoliberalism has not prevailed in Britain, the US, or Australia. Moreover, if it did, then the likes of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown in Britain, Bill Clinton in the US, and Bob Hawke and Paul Keating in Australia did nothing to turn it back. The Conservatives in these three nations did not substantially cut regulation or taxation or spending along with the welfare state that it underpins. Indeed, in Australia, it was Hawke and Keating who started the economic reform process in the early 80s. Rudd mentioned this briefly in his essay, but does not seem to appreciate that this reality undermines his thesis. Rudd's $42 billion rescue, the media verdict. I've left the links there for you to see that. A $120 million lesson in green scares. I won't need to remind you that Sunday will be a year to the day since the dredging started in Port Phillip Bay. How could you forget? That disaster has since played out, just as the protesters and their friends of the age warned, hasn't it? The few fish left in our beloved bay all have three heads. Brighton has been washed into the sea. The waves glow with radioactivity. Beachside businesses have been ruined. And swimmers now emerge from the bay's filthy water to find their flesh stripped from their bones by the toxin stirred up by that monster of a Dutch dredge that has now chewed through the heads and plowed up the Yarra. Oh, pardon. You mean you haven't noticed any of this? Zip? You mean the Office of Environmental Monitor in fact issued a press release last week headed "Beach water quality in great shape for summer crowds"? Shaky Rudd's $42 billion gamble? Kevin Rudd hasn't just bet $42 billion on a punt that he can kick the economy out of a slump. The Prime Minister has also bet $42 billion of your money on his hunch that this time, at last, he understands what the hell is going on and how he can fix it. But his record shows that if he gets this one right, it will be a first. France rejects Rudd's plans. France rejects exactly the kind of stimulus package that Kevin Rudd has just bought with $44 billion of your cash. Going cold on Antarctic warming. Professor Eric Steig last month announced in Nature that he'd spotted a warming in West Antarctica that previous researchers had missed through slackness. A warming so strong that it more than made up for the cooling in East Antarctica. Whew! Found that we had proof that Antarctica as a whole was warming and not cooling after all. Global warming really was global now. The paper was immediately greeted with suspicion, not least because one of the authors was Michael Mann of the infamous hockey stick, now discredited, and data was reconstructed from very sketchy weather station records, combined with assumptions from satellite observations. But Stephen McIntyre, who did most to expose Mann's hockey stick, now notices a far more embarrassing problem with Steig's paper. Previous researchers hadn't overlooked the data. What they'd done was ignore data from West Antarctic automatic weather stations in particular that didn't meet their quality control. As you can see above, 1 shows no warming, 2 shows insignificant warming, and 4th, from a station dubbed Harry, shows a sharp jump in temperatures that helped Steig and his team discover their warming Antarctic. Uh-oh. Harry, in fact, is a problematic site that was buried in snow for years and then re-sited in 2005. But worse, the data that Steig used in his model, which he claimed now from Harry, was actually old data from another station on the Ross ice shelf known as Gill, with new data from Harry added to it, producing the abrupt warming. The data is worthless, or, as McIntyre puts it, considered by itself, Gill has a slightly negative trend from 1987 to 2002. The big trend in New Harry arises entirely from the impact of splicing the 2 data sets together. It's a mess. Read this link and see what McIntyre's superb forensic work. Why wasn't this error picked up earlier? Perhaps because the researchers got the results they'd hoped for, and no alarm bell went off that made them check. Now wait for the papers to report the error with zeal with which they reported Steig's warming.